The waitress laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh, the kind that dripped with sarcasm. "You must be lost," she said, leaning over the table. "This isn't a movie set, old man." The restaurant was busy that evening, a Friday rush at the Golden Fork. Plates clattered, orders were called, and waitresses weaved between tables like dancers in a chaotic ballet. But for a moment, everything seemed to pause. The sound of her laughter cut through the hum of conversation like a knife. Steven Seagal looked up from his water calmly, unbothered. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't even tighten his grip on the glass. There was a quiet power in the way he sat, a presence that didn't demand attention yet could not be ignored. "Words matter," he said softly, almost to himself, though she could hear it clearly. "They reveal who we truly are." The waitress smirked, clearly amused. She had dealt with her fair share of difficult customers, and she assumed this was just another one, a quiet old man who wouldn't dare make a scene. "Think you're some kind of hero, huh?" She shot back, clearly enjoying herself. No one spoke. Diners paused mid-bite, glancing between the two. Some tried to hide their curiosity behind menus, others whispered to each other in disbelief. Everyone sensed that something in the air had shifted. Steven didn't answer immediately. He simply placed his hand lightly on the table, calm and composed. He didn't move toward her, didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. Yet somehow his stillness carried weight. It was the kind of calm that unsettled people more than anger ever could. The waitress, noticing that her usual tricks weren't getting a reaction, leaned closer, her voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" A faint smile crossed Steven's face. He didn't laugh, he didn't scold. He simply met her gaze and said again, in that calm, measured tone, "Arrogance blinds people, right when they need vision the most." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. No one dared speak. The restaurant was suddenly too quiet, the normal chaos suspended. And though she didn't know it yet, the man she had just insulted was not only extraordinary. He was about to change the entire evening, and her understanding of respect, forever. The restaurant was buzzing with life. The kind of Friday evening energy that made servers move faster, chefs shout orders louder, and diners chatter over the clatter of plates and silverware. The Golden Fork prided itself on being a classy, modern bistro, a place where regulars felt at home and newcomers were always curious. Yet, amid the energy, one corner table sat in quiet contrast. Steven Seagal occupied it. No entourage, no fanfare. Just him, a simple jacket thrown over his shoulders, jeans slightly faded, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He looked unassuming, almost like any other man who might have wandered in for a casual meal. Yet the air around him carried something different. A calm authority, a presence that didn't announce itself but demanded attention anyway. The young waitress, Marissa, had noticed him immediately. She prided herself on reading people quickly, on spotting opportunities for humor, for teasing, for testing boundaries. And this man, sitting alone, quiet, and seemingly ordinary, presented a challenge. She liked challenges. Approaching the table, tray in hand, she put on her sharpest smirk. "Well, what'll it be, old man? Soup and a bedtime story?" Her tone was playful but edged with arrogance, confident that her words would provoke some kind of reaction. Most customers would flinch, perhaps chuckle nervously, or at worst, give her a cold look before retreating. She expected nothing more. Steven looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, unblinking, steady. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. For a moment, Marissa wondered if he had even heard her. And then he spoke, quietly, without any trace of anger or sarcasm. "Words can hurt," he said, "but they also reveal character." The restaurant seemed to quiet itself just a little. Some nearby diners looked over their menus, curious, sensing the tension. Others whispered softly to each other, wondering what kind of man would respond so calmly to such an insult. Marissa rolled her eyes. "Character, huh? You think that makes you special?" she asked, leaning slightly closer. She had dealt with all types, brash, loud, timid, funny. But there was something in the calmness of this man that unnerved her, though she didn't yet know why. She glanced at the other staff members. Some of the more experienced servers were exchanging subtle glances, eyebrows raised. They recognized the quiet strength in the man's demeanor. even if they didn't know him personally. A few regular diners were beginning to murmur amongst themselves, trying to identify who he might be, though nothing seemed familiar yet. Steven took a sip of water, unhurried, eyes still locked on hers. "Arrogance," he said slowly, "makes people blind, right when they need vision the most." Marissa hesitated. The words were soft, yet they carried weight like a stone dropped into still water. The restaurant noise seemed distant now, muted. For the first time that evening, she realized that her usual tools, sarcasm, teasing, mockery, were ineffective. This was not a man who reacted the way most people did. He observed, he measured, he waited. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. "You think you're some kind of hero?" she challenged a little defensively now. Some of the staff shifted uncomfortably, sensing the edge in her voice, sensing the quiet tension building between them. Steven didn't answer immediately. He simply put down his glass, his movements deliberate, unhurried. There was a rhythm to him, a patience that spoke louder than any words. He didn't rise, didn't gesture, didn't threaten. Yet somehow his stillness was more commanding than a yell ever could be. Marissa took a breath, trying to regain her confidence. "You don't impress me," she said louder this time. A few nearby diners glanced over, sensing the rising tension. She wanted to draw a laugh from her peers, to assert her dominance in this small corner of the restaurant. And then Steven stood, not aggressively, not with anger, not with the slightest hint of hostility. He simply stood, tall, calm, and deliberate. Every head in the restaurant turned. The diners froze mid. Conversation, staff paused mid-step. Even the clatter of dishes seemed to quiet. Steven didn't say a word. He walked slowly toward the kitchen, each step measured, confident. Marissa froze, uncertain whether she should follow, apologize, or simply watch. The room felt heavier, as if his presence alone had shifted the balance of power. And in that moment, the entire restaurant, staff, diners, everyone, understood something. The man they had dismissed as ordinary was anything but. He had arrived quietly, taken his seat, and already, without raising his voice, without confrontation, had captured the full attention of everyone in the room. No one yet knew what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The events of this evening would not be forgotten anytime soon. The restaurant was silent, now, though the quiet was heavy, charged. The usual chatter, the clinking of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by a single tense anticipation. Every eye followed Steven Seagal as he moved toward the kitchen, and every heartbeat in the room seemed to echo louder in that stillness. Marissa, the young waitress, remained frozen near his table. Her smirk had disappeared, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty she hadn't felt in years. She had thought herself clever, witty, untouchable, but the calm in Steven's movements unsettled her more than any angry shout or aggressive stare ever could. He wasn't reacting the way anyone expected, and that in itself was intimidating. He reached the edge of the kitchen doorway, his eyes sweeping across the staff. The chefs paused mid-chop. The line cooks froze, spatulas in hand. Even the dishwasher, who had long stopped noticing anyone in the dining area, glanced up. There was a weight in his presence that demanded attention, respect, without a single word. Marissa finally broke the silence. "Wait, what are you doing?" Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her nervousness. She stepped forward, uncertain, almost as if she wanted to block him from doing something she couldn't predict. Marissa swallowed. The words, soft as they were, seemed to carry a weight far heavier than her sarcasm. The staff behind the counter murmured among themselves, recognizing something familiar but unable to place it. A few regular diners whispered, That's Steven Seagal." But she didn't believe them. No one believed it. A man sitting quietly in a corner, quiet and calm, couldn't possibly be the Steven Seagal. That name belonged on screens, in action movies, in stories of martial arts mastery. Yet the stillness, the confidence, the subtle authority, it all fit. Steven didn't wait for further recognition. Instead, he moved purposefully to the counter near the kitchen. He didn't shout. He didn't call attention to himself. He simply placed something on the counter, a folded envelope. The staff leaned closer. Inside, they glimpsed a sum that immediately turned heads, a tip large enough to make even the most seasoned servers stop in awe. Marissa's jaw dropped. That can't be real," she whispered under her breath. But Steven's calm eyes met hers again, and in that moment she knew it was. He spoke once more, his voice steady but piercing, directed at her now. "Respect is earned, not given. Words are powerful, and they have consequences. How you treat others will always come back to you." Her stomach churned. The words were simple, but the delivery, the quiet authority behind them, carried far more weight than any insult or bravado could have. She had thought she had power in that moment. She had thought she controlled the situation, but she hadn't even begun to understand the kind of power Steven held, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, that didn't need theatrics to command respect. Around them, staff and diners alike felt the shift. Conversations had stopped completely. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The waitress who had mocked him moments ago suddenly realized she was standing in the presence of someone far greater than she had imagined. Steven's calm, deliberate movements, his measured words, and the quiet authority he exuded had already turned the tables. What she thought was mockery had become a lesson, and the lesson was just beginning. The envelope remained on the counter, a silent symbol of the unexpected outcome. The staff exchanged glances, unsure whether to move, speak, or simply continue watching. Marissa's mind raced. She had no idea what would happen next, but she felt certain that her life, even in this small corner of the restaurant, had just been changed. No one spoke. No one dared move. Only Steven Seagal, calm as ever, stood there. A living example of quiet power, measured consequence, and unshakable control. And in that moment, everyone in the room realized something profound. Arrogance and insults were fleeting, but calm authority and respect lasted forever. The conflict was not over yet. The showdown had only just begun, and the final lessons, both shocking and unforgettable, were still to come. The restaurant seemed suspended in time. The normal hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, the occasional burst of laughter, all of it had vanished. Every diner, every staff member, even those who had been preoccupied with their phones, were now watching Steven Seagal. His calm demeanor, his deliberate movements, and the quiet authority he radiated had captured every eye in the room. Marissa, the waitress who had insulted him, felt her stomach twist. She had always considered herself clever, quick-witted, unafraid to speak her mind. But now, confronted by the stillness of this man, the weight of her arrogance pressed down on her. For the first time, she felt small, uncertain, and exposed. The envelope on the counter glinted slightly under the warm restaurant lights. It was more than just a folded piece of paper. It was a statement. The staff leaned in, curiosity and disbelief battling on their faces. Some of the more experienced servers whispered to each other. "Is that?" one began, voice trailing off. Others were silent, simply watching as Steven remained calm, composed, almost serene. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. There was no theatrics, no showmanship, just a quiet, unshakable presence that demanded respect in the purest sense. Marissa opened her mouth to say something, to regain control, to assert herself, but the words faltered. The confident sarcasm that had flowed so easily from her lips moments ago had vanished. She felt a growing sense of awe mixed with fear. She had underestimated him, and she knew it. A few diners began whispering among themselves. "That's Steven Seagal," one woman murmured to her companion. Others shook their heads in disbelief. How could someone so quiet, so unassuming, be the legendary martial artist and actor? Yet the evidence was undeniable. Even without the recognition, his movements, his calm authority, and the weight of his presence made the realization impossible to ignore. Steven's gaze swept across the room, briefly meeting the eyes of each staff member. There was no judgment in his eyes, only awareness. He noticed who had treated him with dignity, who had laughed at his expense, and who had been quietly observant. Each person in that room felt it, the subtle, almost imperceptible evaluation that carried far more weight than words or threats ever could. Marissa's mind raced. She had mocked him publicly, thinking herself clever, thinking she was in control, and now she realized just how wrong she had been. The adrenaline of the confrontation was replaced by a sinking awareness of her own misjudgment. Steven finally moved, taking deliberate steps toward the counter. The staff instinctively stepped back, clearing space. The envelope he had placed there earlier remained untouched, a silent but powerful statement. Some of the staff bent closer, trying to glimpse its contents. Then he spoke quietly, but with a clarity that cut through the tension like a knife. "Respect is earned," he said, turning toward Marissa. "Not demanded. Words have weight. Actions have consequences. Remember that before you dismiss someone based on appearances." Marissa swallowed hard. Her face flushed. She had no words, no clever retort, no way to reclaim her moment of superiority. All she could do was listen, absorb, and reckon with the truth of his calm authority. Around them, the staff reacted. Some exchanged looks of surprise, awe, or embarrassment. A few of the diners murmured among themselves, clearly impressed and slightly intimidated by the unfolding scene. Even those who had not recognized Steven Seagal instinctively understood the gravity of the moment. And then, without a word, Steven walked toward the exit. Each step was deliberate, confident, measured. The envelope remained on the counter, a silent symbol of the lesson he had imparted. The staff and diners followed his movements with wide eyes, some reaching for their phones, others too stunned to move. Marissa remained frozen, watching him leave. Her heart pounded, her mind whirring. She had thought she controlled the situation, thought she was in command. And now, she realized the full extent of her miscalculation. As the front doors swung shut behind him, the restaurant slowly began to return to life. But the atmosphere had changed. The energy was no longer light or casual. It was charged with the awareness of what had just occurred. The calm, measured presence of one man had shifted the dynamics of an entire room. For Marissa, the lesson was clear. Humility, respect, and awareness carried far more weight than arrogance or sarcasm. And though Steven Seagal was gone from sight, his impact lingered, shaping the thoughts and behavior of everyone in that restaurant long after the doors had closed. The conflict was far from over in her mind. She knew she had been humbled, but she also realized that the true story was just beginning, that the consequences, both shocking and instructive, were yet to fully reveal themselves. The restaurant was still buzzing quietly, but the tension lingered in every corner. Diners were whispering, servers were exchanging wide-eyed glances, and Marissa, the waitress who had insulted Steven Seagal, was frozen, her heart still racing. She could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on her like a heavy curtain, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. As the door swung open again, a subtle hush fell over the room. It wasn't loud, dramatic, or attention-seeking. It was just that quiet, undeniable shift in energy that made everyone instinctively stop what they were doing. A sleek black car had pulled up outside. In a matter of moments, 3 individuals in sharp suits entered the restaurant. They moved quickly, but not recklessly, their eyes scanning the room with purpose. One of them, a middle-aged executive, called out, "Mr. Seagal, we've been trying to reach you." The staff and diners turned their heads in unison. Marissa's jaw dropped. She had recognized the calm authority, the quiet power, and now the confirmation came in the form of people clearly acting on his behalf. Steven Seagal turned slowly to face them, maintaining his unshakable composure. His expression was calm, unhurried, and deliberate, the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller yet infinitely heavier at the same time. The executive spoke again, his voice respectful but hurried. "We have a matter that requires your immediate attention. It's urgent." Steven nodded once, acknowledging the urgency without breaking his calm demeanor. Then he turned to Marissa, the young waitress who had challenged him just moments before. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the lessons we need most are delivered in unexpected ways. Words have power and respect is earned." Marissa felt her stomach tighten. The envelope he had left on the counter earlier, the tip, was no longer just a generous gesture. It had become a symbol of the entire encounter: humility, patience, and measured action. The staff whispered among themselves, many reaching for their phones to capture the moment. But even then, no one wanted to disturb the unfolding scene. One of the executives stepped closer, handing Steven a folder. He opened it briefly, scanning the contents with calm precision. Then, without a word, he placed the folder back in the executive's hands. It was clear to everyone in the room, even those who had not recognized him before, that Steven Seagal was not merely a guest. He was someone of consequence, a person whose decisions could change the course of events for everyone present. Marissa's mind raced. The arrogance she had displayed just minutes earlier now seemed foolish. The confidence she had relied on to assert herself had been no match for the quiet, unwavering authority of the man before her. She felt both awe and fear, a mixture that left her frozen in place, unsure whether to apologize or simply remain silent. Steven turned back to the staff and diners, his voice calm, even and firm. You may not understand it now, but every action carries weight. Treat people with dignity, words matter. And always remember, respect is never given freely, it must be earned. The executives nodded, stepping aside to allow him to leave. Steven walked toward the door, each movement deliberate, every step measured. Marissa watched him go, her hands clenched, her mind spinning with the enormity of what had just occurred. Then, just as the door swung shut behind him, she realized something profound. The envelope, the words, and the calm authority of the man she had insulted were all part of a larger lesson. It wasn't about money, fame, or intimidation. It was about character, humility, and the consequences of one's actions. The restaurant slowly returned to life, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. The diners whispered, the staff exchanged looks, and Marissa, once confident, now humbled, knew that her perspective had changed forever. She had seen firsthand the quiet power of a man who did not need to raise his voice to command respect. And though Steven Seagal had left the building, his presence lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the encounter. The shock of recognition, the revelation of his identity, and the lessons embedded in his calm demeanor would not be forgotten. Marissa took a deep breath, finally finding her voice. She bent down to pick up the envelope, realizing that what it represented went far beyond the monetary value. It was a reminder, a tangible symbol, that the people we dismiss, mock, or underestimate might just be the ones who leave the greatest impact on our lives. The reveal was complete. The lesson was clear, and the entire room, staff and diners alike, would remember that night. The night when respect, humility, and quiet authority triumphed over arrogance and sarcasm, leaving everyone in awe of the man who had walked in quietly, insulted, and walked out having taught an unforgettable lesson. The restaurant had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The chatter was quieter, the laughter more subdued, and the staff moved with a heightened awareness, as if every step carried weight. What had unfolded in the last few minutes was no ordinary encounter. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and consequences delivered with quiet precision. Marissa, the waitress who had insulted Steven Seagal, remained frozen near the counter. The envelope he had left sat before her like a beacon, a tangible symbol of the lesson she had just received. She had expected confrontation, perhaps even anger, but instead she had received calm authority paired with undeniable generosity. She could feel the lesson settling deep inside her, reshaping her understanding of respect. The other staff exchanged glances, whispering softly among themselves. "Did you see that?" one of the servers asked, still catching her breath. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, and yet, her voice trailed off as everyone acknowledged the unspoken truth. Respect could not be forced, it could only be earned. Marissa finally bent down to pick up the envelope. The weight of it was surprising. Not because of its monetary value, though that was impressive, but because of the meaning it carried. Steven's act was deliberate. It was a reward for those who had treated others with dignity and a subtle, unforgettable lesson for those who had not. She realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could continue as she had, relying on sarcasm and bravado, or she could change, applying the lesson she had just learned. She looked around the restaurant and saw the quiet respect in the eyes of her colleagues. The regulars, still seated at their tables, whispered about the encounter. Some snapping pictures, some simply watching in awe. The staff who had observed everything firsthand understood that this was not just a story to tell later, it was a memory that would guide their behavior moving forward. Steven had not returned to the restaurant, yet his presence lingered. The calm authority he exuded, combined with the generosity of his actions, had transformed the mood of the entire establishment. Marissa, who had entered the encounter with confidence and arrogance, now felt a sense of humility that was both uncomfortable and enlightening. She straightened, taking a deep breath, and addressed the other staff quietly but firmly. "We need to remember this," she said. "Not just the money, but the lesson. How we treat people matters every single time." Her words carried a weight they had never had before, reflecting the change within her. The envelope remained on the counter as a silent reminder of the encounter. Some staff members dared to peek inside, their eyes widening as they saw the generosity Steven had shown. But more important than the tip was the understanding they all shared. Now, true power was quiet. True respect was earned through humility, patience, and integrity. Marissa turned back to her station, her mind still buzzing with the events that had just transpired. She realized she had been given a second chance, a moment to reflect on her actions and correct her behavior moving forward. For the first time, she truly understood the difference between arrogance and confidence, mockery and wit, superficial charm and genuine respect. The diners slowly resumed their meals, whispering among themselves about the encounter. The energy in the restaurant had shifted from casual chatter to quiet reverence. Staff moved with intention, aware that their behavior now mattered more than ever, inspired by the example set by a man who had entered quietly, faced insult, and left with lessons delivered more powerfully than any words or confrontation could. As the evening wore on, Marissa found herself smiling. Not the smug, sarcastic smile she had worn earlier, but a calm, reflective one. She had learned something she would carry for the rest of her life. Respect, she realized, was never about fear or dominance. It was about integrity, awareness, and the choices we make in every interaction. By the time the restaurant closed, the staff gathered around the envelope one last time. It was a symbol of more than generosity. It was a reminder of the quiet strength that could change lives, the kind of strength that did not need to be announced or flaunted. Steven Seagal had walked into their lives briefly, yet the impact was lasting, unforgettable, and transformative. And in that moment, Marissa understood fully what she had witnessed. She had been humbled, educated, and inspired. She had been shown that quiet authority, calm resolve, and genuine respect carried far more weight than sarcasm, arrogance, or mockery. And she knew, deep down, that her life, and the way she treated others, would never be the same again. The night ended with silence, reflection, and a sense of awe that lingered long after the doors were locked. Steven Seagal had left, but the lessons he imparted remained, etched in the minds of all who had witnessed them. The restaurant was quiet now, the energy completely transformed. What had been a bustling Friday night rush had given way to a sense of reflection and awareness. Staff and diners alike were still processing what had just occurred, their minds replaying every detail, every word, every subtle movement of the man who had entered their lives so briefly yet left an indelible mark. Marissa, the waitress who had insulted Steven Seagal, stood behind the counter, hands folded nervously. She had watched him leave, had observed the envelope and the generosity it represented, and had felt the weight of his calm authority. The words he had spoken about respect, humility, and the consequences of arrogance echoed in her mind. She realized, in a way she hadn't before, that respect was not something to be demanded, mocked, or assumed. It was something earned through character, patience, and integrity. The other staff members gathered near her, speaking in hushed tones. They exchanged glances that reflected a shared understanding. Even those who had not recognized Steven Seagal by name could feel the profound lesson in his demeanor, in the way he had handled the confrontation with grace and quiet strength. Some of the regular diners lingered at their tables, whispering among themselves, replaying the scene over and over, sharing their own reactions and insights. Marissa bent down and picked up the envelope once again, feeling the tangible weight of the lesson it carried. The money inside was impressive, yes, but the significance went far beyond the tip itself. It was a symbol of generosity, integrity, and the quiet power of someone who did not need to shout to command respect. She understood that Steven's lesson was not merely about money or fame. It was about values, behavior, and the way one treats others. She straightened and turned to the staff. "We've all learned something tonight," she said, her voice steady for the first time. "It's not about who we think we are, or how clever we are. It's about respect, about humility, about being aware that every word and action has consequences." Her colleagues nodded, some still in awe, others reflecting quietly. For a moment, the entire room shared a collective understanding that something rare and valuable had just been experienced. The diners gradually returned to their meals, but the atmosphere was different. Conversations were quieter, more deliberate. The staff moved with a sense of purpose, aware that the encounter they had witnessed had changed something in them. Marissa, in particular, felt a shift within herself. She had started the evening full of sarcasm and confidence, believing she was untouchable, but now she carried humility and awareness. She realized that arrogance could be disarming, but genuine respect, demonstrated through calm authority and thoughtful action, was lasting and transformative. For Steven Seagal, it had been a brief visit, a single table, a few words, a generous gesture. Yet the impact rippled through the entire restaurant. He had shown that power does not always need to announce itself, that true strength is quiet, deliberate, and measured, that lessons, when delivered with calm authority rather than aggression, are often the most unforgettable. Marissa looked at the envelope one last time and smiled quietly. She understood that this night would stay with her forever. She had learned a lesson that extended far beyond a single encounter: the importance of humility, the value of respect, and the subtle, undeniable power of quiet authority. She vowed to carry it with her in every interaction, to treat every customer, colleague, and stranger with dignity, and to remember that even the most unassuming people can leave the greatest impact. The lesson of the evening was simple yet profound. Respect is not for the powerful, the famous, or the loud. It is for everyone, because the person you ignore today, mock today, or underestimate today might be the one who changes your life tomorrow. As the staff cleaned up, the diners departed, and the lights dimmed, one thought remained in everyone's mind: humility, integrity, and respect are far more powerful than arrogance, sarcasm, or bravado. And in the quiet, calm presence of one man, they had all witnessed a lesson they would never forget. Type respect if you believe humility is true strength, and tell us where you're watching from. Your story matters just as much as the lessons we carry forward. The night ended not with noise or chaos, but with reflection and awe, and in that quiet, the power of one man's presence left a permanent mark on everyone who had witnessed it.